I won $12 million in the lottery and decided not to tell any of my children. Thank God I kept it secret. On Father's Day, I received a message. We don't want to have lunch with a poor old man. Only one unexpected person came to visit me. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Patrick, and at 65 years old I thought I knew everything about disappointment. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sitting in my small kitchen, drinking instant coffee from the same chipped mug I'd used for the past 10 years, when I heard the lottery numbers on the radio. I pulled out my ticket, the one I'd bought with the loose change from my grocery shopping, and started checking the numbers. 1 match, 2, 3. My hand started shaking. 4, 5, 6, $12 million. I sat there staring at that piece of paper for what felt like hours. The coffee got cold, the radio kept playing. Outside, life continued as normal, while inside my little apartment, everything had changed. My first instinct was to call my children. Michael, my oldest at 42, worked in real estate and was always complaining about money troubles. Sarah, 39, was a single mother struggling to make ends meet with her 2 teenagers. David, my youngest at 36, bounced between jobs and relationships like a pinball. They would be so happy for me, so relieved that their old man wouldn't be a burden anymore. But then I stopped. When was the last time any of them had called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time they visited without needing something? Michael lived 20 minutes away, but I'd seen him 3 times in the past year. Always rushed, always checking his phone, always with some excuse about why he couldn't stay long. Sarah lived across town and called maybe once a month, usually to complain about her ex-husband or ask if I could babysit on short notice when her regular sitter fell through. David was the most honest about it. He only contacted me when he needed money, which had been 5 times in the past 6 months. I looked around my modest apartment. The furniture was old but clean. The walls needed painting, but the place was comfortable enough for an old man living on Social Security and a small pension from 30 years at the post office. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, but it was mine. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. I wanted to see how they treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer them except myself. I wanted to know if their love was real or if it was just obligation, mixed with the hope that maybe someday I'd help them out of whatever financial hole they'd dug themselves into. The next few weeks were strange. Every day I woke up knowing I was a millionaire, but I kept living exactly the same way. I still clipped coupons. I still bought the store brand cereal. I still wore the same 3 shirts I'd been rotating for the past 2 years. The only difference was the ticket, which I kept hidden in an old shoebox under my bed, right next to the photos from happier times when my wife Margaret was still alive and my children still seemed to enjoy my company. I watched people differently now. The cashier at the grocery store who always smiled and asked about my day, Mrs. Chen from upstairs, who sometimes brought me soup when she made too much. The mailman who took an extra minute to chat about the weather. None of them knew I could afford to buy the whole building now, but they treated me with kindness anyway. My children's behavior didn't change at all. Michael sent a text on my birthday, 3 days late. Sarah called to ask if I could watch her kids for the weekend while she went on a date. David showed up unannounced one evening, claiming he just wanted to visit, but left 20 minutes later with $60 for gas money to get to a job interview that I suspected didn't exist. I started to understand something painful, but necessary. They saw me as poor old Patrick, the widower who lived alone and couldn't contribute anything meaningful to their lives. They visited out of duty, called out of guilt, and helped only when it was convenient for them. But I wasn't bitter. I was curious. How far would it go? How clearly would they show me what I really meant to them? Father's Day was coming up in a few weeks. I decided that would be my test. I'd invite them all for lunch the way Margaret used to do when she was alive. I'd cook their favorite meal, set the table nicely, and see if they'd spend one afternoon with their father just because he asked them to. I spent days planning it. I called each of them personally, not just a text message. I told them how much it would mean to me to have the whole family together. I even offered to cook Margaret's famous pot roast, the one they all used to beg for when they were kids. Michael said he'd try to make it, but he had an important client showing that weekend. Sarah said it sounded nice, but she wasn't sure about her work schedule. David just said, "Yeah, sure, Dad," in that tone that meant he was already thinking about something else. As Father's Day approached, I found myself looking forward to it despite their lukewarm responses. Maybe when they saw how much effort I was putting in, maybe when they remembered how much these family gatherings used to mean to all of us, they'd realize what they'd been missing. I grocery shopped carefully, buying the best cuts of meat I could afford with my regular budget. I cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. I even bought a small bouquet of flowers for the table, the kind Margaret always said made everything look special. The morning of Father's Day, I was up early, seasoning the roast, peeling potatoes, setting the table with the good plates Margaret had insisted we keep for special occasions. The apartment smelled like home used to smell when the kids were young, and Sunday dinners were sacred family time. I was arranging the flowers when my phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a third. That's when my real education about my children began. The first text was from Michael. I opened it expecting maybe a running late message or a request for directions. "Dad can't make it today. The Hendersons want to see 3 more houses, and this commission could really help us out. You understand, right? Business first, maybe next month." I stared at the screen, reading it twice. Business first. On Father's Day. The second text came from Sarah, while I was still processing the first one. "Hi, Dad. Emma has a soccer tournament today that I totally forgot about, and Jake has a friend's birthday party. Rain check? BTW, my car is making that noise again. Might need to borrow some money for repairs soon." My hands were starting to shake as I opened the third message from David. "Not gonna make it, Dad. To be honest, sitting around your depressing apartment eating cheap food doesn't sound like a fun Sunday. Maybe if you had something interesting going on in your life, we'd want to visit more. Just saying." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of roasting meat and the sight of my carefully set table, and felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something deeper and more devastating. They didn't see me as their father anymore. They saw me as an obligation, a burden. Someone who had nothing to offer them except guilt trips and requests for their time. David's message was the cruelest, but it was also the most honest. At least he'd said what the others were thinking. My apartment was depressing. My life was boring. I was just a poor old man with nothing interesting to offer. I walked to the table where I'd arranged everything so carefully. The good plates, the cloth napkins Margaret had embroidered years ago, the flowers that suddenly looked foolish and desperate. I'd spent 3 days preparing for this meal, dreaming about having my family together again, and they'd dismissed it all with text messages. But the worst part wasn't the rejection. The worst part was the casual cruelty of it. The way they'd phrase their excuses, as if my feelings didn't matter at all, as if I was asking too much by wanting to spend one afternoon with my own children. Michael's business-first attitude stung, because I remembered all the times I'd missed things for work when he was growing up, all the baseball games and school plays I'd sacrificed to provide for the family. Now that he was the breadwinner, I was supposed to understand that his time was more valuable than mine. Sarah's message was almost worse because of how she'd slipped in that request for money at the end. She couldn't spare 3 hours for lunch with her father, but she could ask him to help pay for her car repairs in the same breath she was canceling on him. And David. David's message was like a slap across the face, but at least it was honest. He was telling me exactly what all 3 of them thought, that I was pathetic, that my life wasn't worth their time, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. I sat down heavily in one of the chairs I'd arranged around the table. The roast would be ready in 2 hours. The potatoes were already prepared. The house smelled like a celebration that no one was coming to. For the first time since Margaret died 5 years ago, I cried. Not the quiet tears I'd shed at her funeral, or the occasional sadness that hit me when I missed her. This was deep, ugly sobbing that came from a place I'd kept locked away. I cried for the father I'd tried to be and apparently failed at being. I cried for the grandfather my grandchildren barely knew because their parents couldn't be bothered to bring them around. I cried for all the Sundays I'd spent alone while telling myself my children were just busy, just going through phases, just dealing with their own lives. But mostly I cried because I finally understood what I'd been refusing to see for years. I had raised 3 people who didn't love me. They might feel obligated to me, they might even feel guilty about neglecting me, but they didn't love me enough to sacrifice anything for my happiness. When the tears finally stopped, I sat in the silence of my apartment and thought about that lottery ticket hidden under my bed. $12 million. Enough money to change their attitudes toward me completely, I was sure. Enough money to make them interested in my life again, to make them eager to visit, to make them remember that I was their father. But did I want their love if it had to be bought? I looked around the table again at all the careful preparations I'd made, and something hardened inside me. This was who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. This was how they treated me when they believed I was just a poor old man whose only value was as an occasional babysitter or emergency loan. The roast timer went off, filling the quiet apartment with its insistent beeping. I walked to the oven and turned it off, but I didn't take the roast out. I didn't want it anymore. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out that shoebox. I held the lottery ticket in my hands and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell them about the money. Not today, not next week, not ever. I was going to keep living exactly as I had been, and I was going to see who truly cared about me for who I was, not what I could give them. As I sat there on my bed, still holding that ticket worth $12 million, I heard a soft knock on my door. For just a moment, my heart jumped. Maybe one of them had changed their mind. Maybe they'd realized how cruel they'd been and come to salvage Father's Day. But when I opened the door, it wasn't one of my children standing there. It was someone I never would have expected, someone who was about to teach me what real kindness looked like. Standing at my door was Elena Vasquez, my neighbor from apartment 4B. She was holding a covered casserole dish and wearing a gentle smile that seemed to light up the dim hallway. "Patrick," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I made too much enchilada casserole and thought you might like some." Elena was around 60, with silver-streaked black hair that she wore in a neat bun and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd moved into the building about 8 months ago after her husband passed away from cancer. We'd exchanged pleasantries in the hallway, and she'd always been polite, but we'd never really talked beyond basic neighborly greetings. I stood there for a moment, probably looking like a mess, with my red-rimmed eyes and the smell of abandoned pot roast still filling my apartment. "That's very kind of you, Elena, but you didn't need to—" "Are you all right?" she interrupted gently, her eyes studying my face with genuine concern. "You look upset." Something about the way she asked, with real caring in her voice instead of polite obligation, made my throat tighten again. I stepped aside to let her in, not trusting myself to speak. She walked into my kitchen and immediately noticed the set table, the flowers, the place settings for 4 people. She didn't say anything right away, just set her casserole dish on the counter and turned to look at me with understanding in her eyes. "You were expecting company?" she said quietly. I nodded, still not able to find my voice. "Family?" she asked. "My children," I managed to say. "It's Father's Day. I invited them for lunch, but they all canceled, last minute, through text messages." Elena's expression softened with a kind of sympathy I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not the awkward discomfort people usually showed when confronted with someone else's pain, but real understanding. "I'm so sorry," she said, and I could tell she meant it. That must be incredibly hurtful. Something about her tone, the simple acknowledgement that, yes, this was hurtful, broke something loose inside me. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. About the years of feeling like an afterthought, about the way my children only contacted me when they needed something, about how I'd spent days preparing for today, only to be dismissed like I didn't matter. Elena listened without interrupting, without trying to make excuses for my children or offer empty platitudes about how they probably didn't mean it. She just listened, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, after Roberto died, I learned something about people. The ones who really care about you don't need a reason to show it. They don't wait for special occasions or convenient moments. They just show up." She gestured toward the table. "You prepared all this because you love them. They canceled because they don't understand what that love is worth." "Maybe David was right," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "Maybe my life is too depressing, too boring for them to want to be part of it." Elena shook her head firmly. "No. A loving child doesn't measure their parents' worth by how entertaining they are. They love them for who they are, for what they've sacrificed, for the simple fact that they're family." She moved toward the stove, where my pot roast was still sitting in the turned-off oven. "Have you eaten anything today?" I shook my head. "Well, I have a solution," she said with a small smile. "You have a beautiful roast that's probably perfect by now, and I have a casserole that's meant to be shared. Why don't we have Father's Day dinner together? I don't have children of my own, but I think I'd be honored to spend the afternoon with someone who clearly knows how to show love, even if it's not always appreciated." I stared at her, this woman who barely knew me, but was offering to salvage the day I'd been so looking forward to. "You don't have to do that, Elena. I'm sure you have better things to do than babysit a lonely old man." Patrick," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm 60 years old, I'm a widow, and I just spent Father's Day morning visiting Roberto's grave and telling him about the roses I planted on his side of the garden. Trust me when I say that sharing a meal with a kind neighbor is exactly how I'd like to spend the rest of this day. And that's how I found myself having the Father's Day dinner I'd planned, just not with the people I'd expected." Elena helped me bring the roast to the table, and we sat across from each other using Margaret's good plates and cloth napkins. She told me about her life with Roberto, how they'd been married for 35 years and never had children because of medical complications, but how they'd poured their parental love into nieces and nephews and the children in their neighborhood. "Roberto used to say that family isn't always about blood," she said, cutting into the roast. "Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most." As we ate, she asked me about my work at the post office, about Margaret, about the early days when my children were small and still thought their father was the most important person in the world. She listened to my stories with genuine interest, laughing at the funny parts and asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt heard, really heard, not just tolerated. "This roast is incredible," she said, taking another bite. "Roberto would have loved this recipe. He was always trying to get me to make pot roast, but I could never get it as tender as this." "It was my wife's recipe," I told her. She said the secret was to not rush it, to let it cook low and slow until it was ready. Sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She knew how to make a house feel like home, how to make every meal feel like a celebration. I've been trying to recreate that feeling ever since she died, but I think I've been trying to give it to the wrong people. Eleanor reached across the table and patted my hand gently. "You haven't been giving it to the wrong people, Patrick. You've been giving it to people who don't know how to receive it. There's a difference." After dinner, she insisted on helping me clean up, despite my protests. As we washed dishes together, she told me about her work as a retired nurse, about the patients she'd cared for over the years, and how she'd learned that the smallest acts of kindness often meant the most. "You know what I noticed about people in the hospital," she said, drying one of Margaret's good plates. "The ones who got the most visitors weren't necessarily the ones with the most family. They were the ones who had made real connections with people, who had shown genuine care for others. Love attracts love, but it doesn't always come from where you expect it." When we finished cleaning, she gathered up her empty casserole dish. "Thank you for letting me share your Father's Day dinner, Patrick. It was exactly what I needed today." "Thank you for saving it," I said. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't knocked on my door." She smiled. "Probably sat here feeling sorry for yourself and eating too much pot roast." I laughed, realizing it was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. "Would you like to have coffee sometime this week?" she asked, as I walked her to the door. "I make a pretty good Colombian blend, and I'd love to hear more about your postal service stories. Roberto used to love those kinds of stories about real people and their daily lives." "I'd like that very much," I said. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and looked at the table where we'd shared dinner. For the first time in years, Father's Day hadn't ended in disappointment. It had ended with the beginning of something I hadn't expected, a genuine friendship with someone who saw value in my company without needing anything from me in return. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about that lottery ticket hidden in my shoebox. Elena had spent her afternoon with me, not knowing I could afford to take her on vacations around the world or buy her anything she wanted. She'd simply wanted my company, my conversation, my stories about a life she found interesting, just as it was. Maybe Roberto had been right. Maybe family really wasn't always about blood. Maybe sometimes it was about who showed up when you needed them most. Over the next few weeks, Elena and I fell into a comfortable routine. Coffee on Tuesday mornings, grocery shopping together on Thursdays, and quiet dinners on Sundays. It wasn't planned or formal, it just happened naturally, the way good friendships do. Elena had this gift for making ordinary moments feel special. When we had coffee, she'd bring these small pastries she made herself and arrange them on a real plate, not just eaten from the package. When we grocery shopped, she'd point out interesting ingredients and tell me stories about meals she'd made with Roberto, or she'd ask my opinion about what looked fresh or which brand was better. "You have good instincts about food," she told me one Thursday as we stood in the produce section. She was holding 2 avocados, testing their ripeness. "Roberto always said you could tell a lot about someone by how they shopped for groceries. The way you pick vegetables tells me you actually care about what you're putting in your body." I watched her examine the avocados with the same careful attention I'd seen nurses give to patients, thorough but gentle. "Where did you learn to cook?" I asked. "My mother, mostly. She died when I was 25, right after Roberto and I got married. I think I learned to cook as a way of keeping her close to me, you know? Every time I make her enchilada recipe or her tres leches cake, I can almost hear her voice telling me to add a little more vanilla or let the onions cook longer." "Do you miss it, cooking for someone every day?" Elena was quiet for a moment, setting the avocados in our cart. "I miss having someone to cook for," she said finally. "Roberto always made me feel like every meal was a gift, even if it was just scrambled eggs for breakfast. He'd thank me like I'd prepared a feast." I understood exactly what she meant. Margaret had been the same way, treating every dinner like it was special, even the simple weeknight meals after long days at work. "My children don't appreciate food the way Roberto did," I found myself saying. When they were young, they'd wolf down whatever Margaret made without really tasting it. Now, when they visit, they usually suggest we order pizza or go to some chain restaurant. They act like home cooking is too much trouble. Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Some people don't understand that cooking for someone is an act of love. They see it as just fuel, just something to fill their stomachs. But when you put care into preparing food for someone, when you think about what they like and what will nourish them, that's love in its most basic form." These conversations revealed the depth of difference between Elena and my children. Where my children saw inconvenience, Elena saw thoughtfulness. Where they saw obligation, she saw opportunity for connection. The contrast became even more apparent when my children actually did contact me. 3 weeks after Father's Day, Sarah called while Elena and I were playing cards in my apartment. "Dad, I hate to ask, but could you watch Emma and Jake this weekend? My sitter canceled and I have this work conference in Phoenix. It's really important for my promotion." Elena looked up from her cards but didn't say anything, just quietly organized her hand while I talked. "What about their father?" I asked. "You know how unreliable Tom is. He's supposed to have them every other weekend, but he always has some excuse." "Please, Dad, I really need this." I agreed, of course. I always agreed. But after I hung up, Elena set down her cards and looked at me with a gentle but direct expression. "How often does she ask you to babysit?" "Maybe once a month, sometimes twice if she has something special going on." "And how often does she invite you to spend time with them when she doesn't need anything?" I thought about it. The honest answer was never. When Sarah wanted me to watch the kids, I was grandpa. When she didn't need a babysitter, I barely heard from her. She's busy, I said, the excuse automatic after years of practice. I'm sure she is, Elena said kindly. But Patrick, when someone cares about you, they make time for you even when they don't need anything from you. They call to see how you're doing, not just when they have a favor to ask. That weekend, while I watched Emma and Jake, I started to see my relationship with my grandchildren differently too. They were good kids, polite and well-behaved, but they treated me like a friendly stranger. They didn't know my stories, didn't ask about my life, didn't seem particularly interested in spending time with me beyond the movies I'd take them to or the ice cream I'd buy them. "What did you do at work, Grandpa?" Emma asked during lunch on Saturday. But it was the kind of question kids ask adults out of politeness, not genuine curiosity. "I worked at the post office for 30 years, I told her. "I sorted mail and helped people send packages all over the world." "Cool," she said, already losing interest and turning back to her phone. When Elena stopped by on Sunday afternoon to return a book I'd lent her, the difference was stark. She immediately engaged with Emma and Jake, asking them about school and their hobbies with real interest. But more importantly, she included me in the conversation instead of treating me like furniture. "Your grandfather has the most interesting stories about working at the post office," she told them. "He was telling me about the time someone tried to mail a live chicken. Patrick, tell them about that." As I told the story, I watched Elena's face. She'd heard it before during one of our coffee sessions, but she listened like it was the first time, encouraging me with nods and smiles. Emma and Jake, influenced by Elena's genuine interest, actually paid attention and laughed at the funny parts. After Elena left and Sarah came to pick up the kids, Sarah barely thanked me for the weekend. "They weren't too much trouble, were they?" she asked, already gathering their things and checking her phone. "They were wonderful," I said. Elena stopped by and we all had a nice conversation about— "Who's Elena?" Sarah interrupted. "My neighbor. She's become a good friend." Sarah paused in stuffing Jake's clothes into his backpack. "A friend? Dad, you need to be careful about people who might try to take advantage of you." The irony was so thick, I almost laughed. Sarah, who only called when she needed something, was warning me about Elena, who had never asked me for anything except my company. "She's not taking advantage of me," I said. "She's just a kind woman who lost her husband and understands what it's like to be alone." Sarah's expression shifted to something between concern and suspicion. "Just be careful, Dad. Sometimes older women look for lonely men to take care of them financially. You don't have much, but you have your Social Security and your pension." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about Sarah's warning. She saw Elena as a potential threat to resources I supposedly needed to preserve, probably for my children's eventual inheritance. The idea that someone might genuinely enjoy my company without ulterior motives seemed impossible for her to imagine. That night, Elena called to check on me. "How was the rest of your evening with the grandchildren?" "It was fine," I said. "Sarah picked them up a few hours ago." "You sound tired." "Just thinking about some things Sarah said. She warned me to be careful about people who might try to take advantage of me." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Patrick, can I ask you something? In all the time we've been friends, have I ever asked you for anything? Money, favors, anything at all?" I thought about it. "No. If anything, you're always the one bringing me food or offering to help with things. And have I ever made you feel like spending time with me was an obligation or a burden? Never. You make me feel like my company is actually wanted." "Then maybe," she said gently, "the problem isn't that I might take advantage of you. Maybe the problem is that your children can't imagine why someone would want to spend time with you unless they wanted something from you." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. My own children had conditioned me to believe that my only value was what I could provide for others. They couldn't imagine Elena wanting my friendship for its own sake because they'd never wanted it themselves. After we hung up, I lay in bed thinking about the lottery ticket hidden in my shoebox. Elena had been in my life for weeks now, and not once had she mentioned money troubles or hinted that she needed financial help. She worked part-time at a local clinic, lived simply but comfortably, and seemed genuinely content with her life. She wanted my stories, my opinions, my company. She wanted to share meals and conversations and quiet Sunday afternoons. She wanted exactly what I had been hoping my children would want all these years. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. I had been measuring my worth by the wrong standards, seeking love from people who were incapable of giving it freely. But Elena had shown me what unconditional care looked like. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I began to form an idea about how I might honor that gift in a way that would change both our lives forever. It was a Tuesday morning in late July when I realized I was ready to make the biggest decision of my life. Elena and I were having our usual coffee in my kitchen, and she was telling me about a conversation she'd had with her landlord the day before. "He's selling the building," she said, stirring sugar into her cup with more force than necessary. "Apparently, some developer wants to tear it down and build luxury condos." My heart sank. What does that mean for you? I have to be out by the end of September. He's giving all the tenants 60 days notice. She tried to smile, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I suppose it's time for a new adventure. Maybe I'll look for something smaller, further out where the rent is cheaper. How much time do you have to find a place? About 2 months. I've been looking online, but everything decent is either too expensive or too far from the clinic where I work part-time. She set down her cup and looked out the window. I keep telling myself it's an opportunity to start fresh somewhere new, but the truth is, I love this neighborhood. I love being able to walk to the market, to the park where Roberto and I used to sit. I love having you right down the hall. That last sentence hit me harder than she probably intended. In the 3 months since Father's Day, Elena had become the best part of my daily life. The thought of her moving away, of going back to the isolation I'd known before she knocked on my door, was unbearable. "What if you didn't have to move far?" I heard myself asking. She looked at me curiously. "What do you mean?" This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for weeks without fully realizing it. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "Elena, I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone, not even my children." Her expression grew concerned. "Patrick, what is it? Are you ill?" "No, nothing like that." I stood up and walked to my bedroom, returning with the shoebox I'd kept hidden under my bed for months. I set it on the kitchen table between us and lifted the lid. Elena stared at the lottery ticket nestled among the old photographs. "What is this?" "I won the lottery 4 months ago, $12 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner. Elena picked up the ticket with trembling fingers, looking at it and then at me. $12 million, she repeated softly. "I haven't told my children because I wanted to see how they treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. And you've seen how that turned out." Elena set the ticket down carefully, as if it might break. "Patrick, this is incredible. This changes everything for you. It changes everything for us, if you'll let it." She looked at me with confusion. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," I continued. "You've shown me more genuine kindness in 3 months than my own children have shown me in years. You've never asked me for anything except my company. You've made me feel valued and cared for, just as I am." "Patrick, let me finish, please. I know this might sound crazy, but I want to give you $5 million. Elena's face went white. She stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "No, absolutely not. Patrick, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. But that's almost half your winnings. You should spend that money on yourself, on your future, on your children." "My children don't want me unless I'm useful to them," I said firmly. "They've made that clear. You want me just as I am. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Elena began pacing my small kitchen, running her hands through her hair. "Patrick, this is too much. I can't accept this. It wouldn't be right." "Why wouldn't it be right? You've given me something worth far more than money. You've given me back my sense of worth." She stopped pacing and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "But $5 million, Patrick. That's life-changing money." "Exactly. And I want to change your life the way you've changed mine. People will say I took advantage of you, that I manipulated you. Let them say it. I know the truth, and so do you. Elena sat back down, her hands shaking as she reached for her coffee cup. What would you even want me to do with that much money? Whatever makes you happy. Travel, if you want to. Buy a house somewhere beautiful. Start that small bed and a breakfast you told me you and Roberto used to dream about. The important thing is that you'd never have to worry about money again. Patrick, I need to think about this. This is enormous. Of course, take all the time you need. But Elena, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity, and it's not some impulsive gesture. You've shown me what real friendship looks like. You've shown me that my life has value beyond what I can provide for other people. That's worth more than any amount of money. The next few days were difficult. Elena was clearly struggling with my offer, and I respected her need to process it. We still had our regular coffee meetings, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. During this time, my children provided an almost comical contrast to Elena's genuine internal struggle. David called on Thursday. "Dad, I need to borrow $300. My roommate moved out and stuck me with the full rent. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next paycheck." "When did your roommate move out?" I asked. "Last week. I've been trying to figure out how to handle it on my own, but I'm stuck." Last week. He'd been struggling with this problem for a week, and had only called me when he'd run out of other options. Meanwhile, Elena was losing sleep over whether accepting my offer might somehow harm me. "I'll transfer the money to your account," I told David. "Thanks, Dad. You're a lifesaver." He hung up without asking how I was doing, without mentioning that we hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, without any acknowledgement that I might have my own concerns or problems to deal with. On Friday, Sarah texted asking if I could babysit the following weekend because she wanted to go to her friend's wedding in Las Vegas. "No, how are you? No, I hope this isn't too much trouble. Just an assumption that I would be available and willing." The contrast was stark and painful. Elena was agonizing over accepting a gift I desperately wanted to give her, while my children casually expected me to solve their problems without any consideration for my feelings or circumstances. On Sunday evening, Elena knocked on my door. She looked tired, but determined. "Patrick, I've made a decision about your offer." My heart pounded as I let her in. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same place where we'd shared so many conversations over the past months. "I've been thinking about what you said about how I've changed your life. But you need to understand something too. You've changed mine just as much." I waited, not sure where she was going with this. After Roberto died, I felt invisible. My neighbors were polite but distant. My co-workers were kind but professional. I went weeks sometimes without having a real conversation with anyone. I was starting to think that maybe this was just what life looked like for a woman my age. Quiet, solitary, unremarkable. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Then I met you, and suddenly I had someone who was interested in my stories, who laughed at my jokes, who made me feel like I mattered again. You gave me back my sense of purpose, Patrick. You made me feel valued. Elena?" "So yes," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll accept your gift. Not because I need the money, though I'm grateful for the security it will provide. I'll accept it because I understand now that this isn't about money at all. It's about love. It's about choosing to build a family with the people who actually want to be part of your life." I felt tears well up in my eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But I have one condition." "Anything. We do this together. We plan how to use this money to build something beautiful. Maybe that bed and breakfast we talked about, somewhere we can both live and create a place where people feel welcome and cared for. A real home." I squeezed her hand, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the decision I'd made. $5 million to someone who had never asked me for a penny. Some people would call it foolish, wasteful, even crazy. But I knew better. I was investing in the only relationship in my life that had ever been truly mutual, truly caring, truly free of conditions and expectations. For the first time since Margaret died, I wasn't alone anymore. And tomorrow, Elena and I would start planning our new life together. 6 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of our bed and breakfast, watching the sunrise paint the mountains of North Carolina in shades of gold and pink. The Sunset Haven Inn was everything Elena and I had dreamed it would be: a restored Victorian house with 6 guest rooms, a garden where Elena grew herbs and vegetables, and a kitchen where the smell of fresh bread greeted visitors every morning. Elena emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, her hair caught by the morning breeze. At 61, she looked younger than when I'd first met her, as if having purpose and security had restored something vital in her. "The Hendersons are checking out this morning," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside mine. "They said it was the most peaceful vacation they've ever had." "Because you made them feel like family instead of customers," I said, accepting the warm cup gratefully. It had taken us 3 months to find the perfect property and another 3 to renovate it. Elena had thrown herself into every detail, from selecting the antique furniture to planning the garden layout. She had a gift for creating warmth and welcome that transformed the old house into something magical. I handled the business side, the permits, the insurance, the marketing. It felt good to have purpose again, to wake up each morning with meaningful work to do, but more than that, it felt good to be building something with someone who valued my contributions. "Any word from your children lately?" Elena asked gently. I smiled ruefully. "David called last week. He somehow found out about the bed and breakfast through a mutual friend. He wanted to know if we needed investors." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Investors?" Translation: he wanted to know if there was money to be made here that he could get in on. I sipped my coffee, no longer feeling the sharp pain that such calls used to bring. I told him we were fully funded and doing fine on our own. The truth was, I had heard from all 3 of my children once word got out about my new life. Michael had called expressing sudden concern about my major life changes at my age. Sarah had visited unannounced, clearly fishing for information about my finances while making worried comments about elderly people being taken advantage of. David had been the most direct, asking outright if I needed help managing my assets. None of them had congratulated me on finding happiness. None had expressed genuine interest in my new life or my partnership with Elena. Their concern was transparently focused on what my choices might mean for their future inheritance. "You know what's funny?" I told Elena. "Sarah actually asked me if I was suffering from dementia. She couldn't believe I would make such a dramatic change, unless something was wrong with my mental faculties." "What did you tell her?" "That my mind had never been clearer. That for the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what made me happy instead of what made other people comfortable." A car pulled into our driveway, and we watched as the Hendersons loaded their luggage. They waved at us from the porch, and Mrs. Henderson called out, "Thank you for everything. This place is magical." After they drove away, Elena turned to me with that smile that had first made me feel truly seen. "Do you ever regret it? Giving away so much money, I mean." I considered the question seriously. The $5 million I'd given Elena had been invested wisely. She'd bought our property outright, renovated it beautifully, and established a trust fund that would ensure her financial security for life. The remaining $7 million was more than enough for my own needs, especially since my expenses had decreased dramatically. Our business generated modest income, and more importantly, gave us both a sense of purpose and accomplishment. "Never," I said finally. "Money sitting in a bank account is just numbers. This," I gestured around us, "this is life. Even though your children will inherit less? Elena, my children have never cared about me. They've only cared about what I might leave them someday. The money I gave you is money they never deserved because they never earned it through love or loyalty or genuine care." It was true. In the month since I'd started my new life, my children's calls had become increasingly infrequent and transparently self-interested. They no longer pretended to care about my well-being once it became clear that I wasn't available for their usual requests for money or babysitting. "Besides," I continued, $7 million is still a substantial inheritance, more than most people leave their children. If they can't be satisfied with that, it says more about their character than mine. Our first guests of the day began arriving around noon, a young couple celebrating their anniversary. Elena greeted them like old friends, showing them to their room and explaining the history of the house with the kind of enthusiasm that made everything seem special. I watched her from the garden where I was picking tomatoes for lunch and felt that familiar warmth of gratitude. This woman had saved my life in every way that mattered. She'd shown me that I was worth more than what I could provide for others, that my company had value, that my stories mattered. The $5 million had given her security and opportunity, yes. But what she'd given me was priceless. A reason to wake up excited about the day ahead, someone who genuinely wanted to share life's small pleasures with me, a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. That evening, as we prepared dinner for our guests, Elena told me about a phone call she'd received from her nephew in California. He said he's proud of me for taking such a big risk at my age, she said, chopping onions with practiced efficiency. He said most people our age are too afraid to start over, but that watching me build this new life has inspired him to take some risks of his own. I don't know what kind of risks. He's always wanted to be a teacher, but he went into accounting because it was safer. Now he's thinking about going back to school to get his teaching certificate. I smiled, stirring the soup that would be tonight's first course. That's wonderful. See what happens when people see you living authentically? It gives them permission to do the same. As we served dinner to our guests that night, I listened to the conversation around the table. The young couple was asking Elena about the herbs in the garden. An older gentleman was telling me about his own retirement adventures. A solo traveler was sharing stories about the small town she'd visited on her cross-country journey. This was what family was supposed to feel like. People genuinely interested in each other, sharing stories and laughter, creating memories together. It wasn't about blood relations or obligation. It was about choice, about deciding to care for each other and show up for each other. Later, as Elena and I cleaned up the kitchen together, she said quietly, "Patrick, I want you to know something. The money you gave me changed my life, yes? But you changed my life before you ever mentioned money. You gave me friendship when I was lonely, purpose when I felt lost, and hope when I thought my best years were behind me. You did the same for me," I said, drying the last of the dinner plates. "I know. That's what makes this so perfect. We saved each other." That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, looking up at stars that seemed brighter here in the mountains than they ever had in the city. I thought about Patrick from a year ago, the man who'd sat alone at a carefully set table on Father's Day, waiting for children who never came. That Patrick had measured his worth by how much others needed him, how much he could provide, how useful he could make himself. He'd accepted crumbs of attention and called it love. This Patrick knew better. This Patrick had learned that real love doesn't keep score, doesn't demand payment, doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the numbers I'd kept but rarely used anymore. Michael, Sarah, David, my children, who would always be part of my history but who had chosen not to be part of my future. I could call them. I could try once more to build bridges, to find some way to have them in my life, but I didn't want to anymore. I had found my family, and it was enough. Elena came out onto the porch with her own glass of wine. "Penny, for your thoughts. Just thinking about how different life is when you stop trying to force people to love you and start appreciating the people who already do." She settled into the chair beside mine, and we sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of our new home. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The sound was answered immediately, a perfect example of call and response, of communication between beings who understood each other. "Elena," I said softly. "Yes? Thank you for knocking on my door that day. Thank you for opening it." As we sat there together, I realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the desperate, grasping kind that demands more and more, but the quiet, settled kind that comes from having enough. Enough love, enough purpose, enough peace. I was 70 years old, and I had finally learned the difference between being needed and being loved, and I had never been happier.